The sky was dark and full of smoke as the cargo ship broke through the clouds above the alien world. Flames licked the hull, while pieces of metal ripped away from the engines. The ship spun out of control while alarms rang through every hallway and red lights flashed across the walls. Inside the lower cargo bay, a man named Jake held tight to a metal rail as the world around him shook and screamed. He had no idea what caused the crash, but he knew the ship was going down and fast. His mind raced as he thought about escape. He was only a mechanic, just here to fix broken engines and replace worn parts. But now he was fighting to stay alive on a dying ship falling through the sky. Around him, crates slammed into each other, and sparks flew from broken wires. Steam hissed from a cracked pipe near his head and burned his cheek as he turned to grab a small survival pack. Jake had no time to check the contents. He just grabbed the pack and ran toward the side hatch that led to the emergency escape pods. The ground came too soon. The ship hit hard. Everything shook. The noise was so loud it felt like it tore the air apart. Jake hit the wall and blacked out for a second before the smoke filled his lungs and brought him back. He crawled through the broken hallway past twisted doors and scattered metal. He needed air. He needed to get out. He pushed through a side door that had been bent in the crash and stumbled outside into a thick alien jungle. The air was heavy and wet and full of strange scents. Green light filtered through tall red trees with wide leaves that dripped with glowing dew. Strange animal cries echoed in the distance. Jake took a deep breath. He was alive. But for how long? Behind him, the ship burned slowly. The front half was crushed against a rocky cliff, while the back half was scattered across a wide field of bluegrass. He looked around and saw no other people. He called out, but no one answered. Maybe he was the only one left. He turned toward the jungle, and then he heard a sound. A soft cry. Not human. Small and scared. Jake followed the sound back toward a broken cargo crate lying on its side in the dirt. The metal door was open just a little. He knelt and looked inside. 3 small creatures looked back at him with wide, glowing eyes. They had soft gray fur and tiny horns and tails like ribbons. They looked like alien cubs, barely a few weeks old. They were shaking. They looked hungry, and they were alone. Jake blinked. He remembered seeing their crate during loading. Some kind of protected species being moved to a sanctuary. Now, the handlers were gone. The ship was gone. The sanctuary was gone. Only these little ones remained. Jake looked into their eyes, and something changed in him. He reached into the crate slowly, and the cubs didn't run. One even climbed into his hand. They needed him, and maybe he needed them too. He picked them up carefully and held them close to his chest. Their small bodies were warm and light. He didn't know how to feed them or care for them, but he knew one thing. They would die without protection. He looked around again. The jungle was too quiet, too still. That was never a good sign. Jake moved fast. He found part of the wreckage that was mostly intact and used it to build a small shelter. It was just a broken wall leaned against a large boulder, but it would give some cover for the night. He gathered loose metal and wires and wrapped them around the front to keep things out. He made a bed from torn cloth and placed the cubs inside. They curled together in a ball and soon fell asleep. Jake sat nearby and watched the trees. His ears stayed open. The wind was thick and slow. Every now and then a tree would creak or a bird would call, but something about it felt wrong. Too quiet, too empty, like the jungle was waiting for something. As night fell, the green light faded and the sky turned dark purple. Stars appeared above the trees, but they were different. Not the stars Jake knew. He was very far from home. He pulled his jacket tighter and checked the survival pack. It had water tablets, a small knife, 2 protein bars, a light stick, a metal cup, and a flare. Not much. Not enough. He would have to make do. He couldn't leave the cubs. He wouldn't. They had no one. And now neither did he. The jungle grew darker, and the sounds grew stranger. He heard low growls in the distance. Long howls. A cry like a whistle from something high in the trees. The cubs stirred but stayed quiet. Jake sat awake and listened. He picked up a long metal rod from the wreckage and kept it near his hand. The fire from the ship had gone out, and the night was cold. He stayed like that for hours, watching, waiting. Then he saw them. Eyes. Several. Low to the ground. Yellow and glowing. Moving slowly. Watching him. Watching the shelter. Jake tensed. He stayed still. The eyes disappeared. But now he knew. They were not alone. He leaned back and looked at the cubs. They were sleeping peacefully. They didn't know. They were just babies. Jake looked at the jungle again. He didn't know what hunted in this place. He didn't know if it had claws or teeth or poison or worse. But he knew this. He was human. He would protect them, no matter what came, no matter how many. He would not let them die. And if something came for them, it would have to go through him. The night grew deeper and the jungle grew quieter, but the silence was not peaceful. It was sharp and tense like the air before lightning strikes. Jake sat beside the cubs with his back against the rock and the metal rod still in his hand. His eyes refused to close. Every time he blinked, he saw those yellow lights in the trees. Eyes that moved low and slow. Eyes that vanished when stared at. Something out there was watching them. Not once. Not twice. But many times. It circled. It studied. It waited. Jake's heart thudded in his chest as he scanned the treeline again. His breath came slow and deep like he had learned in training years ago. He was no soldier now, but old instincts still lived in his bones. He looked down at the cubs. They slept quietly huddled together in the soft cloth he had torn from the cargo wreckage. One of them stretched its tiny legs in sleep and made a small sound like a chirp. Jake smiled weakly, but his grip tightened on the rod. He could not fall asleep. Not here. Not yet. The fire from the crash had died, and now only the pale light of the alien moons lit the jungle. The shadows moved with the wind, but some shadows did not move at all. Jake knew how predators worked. They tested their prey. They circled. They waited for weakness. And right now, he looked like weakness. A lone man. 3 helpless cubs. No weapons. No fire. No backup. He scanned the ground nearby and spotted a broken pipe with sharp edges. He pulled it free and tied it to the end of his rod using torn wire. It was crude, but now it was a spear. Jake set it by his side and leaned his head against the rock just for a moment. His eyes drifted. Then he heard a sound. Soft, like claws on stone. He snapped awake and looked toward the noise. Nothing. Just leaves. Just mist. But the sound came again. Closer. A crunch. A breath. Jake stood quickly and grabbed the spear. He raised it. His muscles tense. He heard another sound. Behind him. He turned. And then silence. He waited. Listened. The wind moved through the trees. But there were no birds. No insects. No life. Jake slowly crouched and lit the glow stick from his pack. It cast a pale green light that made the shadows even darker. He held it out. Nothing. But his gut screamed. Something was close. He scanned the jungle again. The trees were too thick. Too tangled. They could hide anything. He stepped away from the shelter and circled around to the back. The cubs were still asleep. He crouched low and listened. Then he saw it. A shape in the distance. Low. For legs. Wide shoulders. It crept forward through the vines. Slow. Silent. Jake froze. The creature had dark fur with silver stripes across its back and long curved claws that clicked softly against the stone. Its mouth hung slightly open and rows of sharp, wet teeth glinted in the moonlight. Jake did not breathe. He watched. It crept closer. Then another moved behind it. And another. A pack. They had come. He backed slowly toward the shelter, keeping his eyes on the beasts. The first one raised its head and sniffed the air. Its eyes glowed yellow and locked onto Jake. Jake raised his spear. His legs shook, but he did not run. The beast snarled low. Then the second beast moved around to the side. They were trying to flank him. Jake moved sideways to block them from reaching the cubs. His heart raced. He could feel sweat on his back, even in the cold night air. The first predator stepped forward slowly. Jake took a deep breath and shouted. His voice rang through the jungle like a thunderclap. The beast froze. Jake waved the spear. He shouted again. Louder. The beast growled and stepped back. But the others did not. They closed in slowly. Cautious but hungry. Jake stepped forward. He thrust the spear toward the closest one. It flinched, then growled louder. The others joined in. Low snarls filled the night. The jungle held its breath. Then a sharp snap rang out as one of them stepped on a dry branch. The sound broke the stillness. The largest beast lunged. Jake swung the spear. It hit the creature's shoulder, and it yelped and rolled away. Jake stepped back to the shelter. He shouted again, this time not in fear, but in anger. The cubs stirred and began to cry softly. Jake glanced at them. They were awake, afraid. He turned back to the jungle. The beasts were still there, watching, but they did not attack again. Jake raised his arms wide and roared like a wild animal. A deep, angry sound that echoed through the trees. The beast stepped back, snarled, then turned and melted into the shadows. Gone. For now. Jake dropped to his knees. His hands shook. His breath came fast. But the cubs were safe. He turned and crawled into the shelter. They rushed to him and curled against his side. Jake held them close. His body ached. His arms trembled. But he smiled. He had faced the night and lived. He had faced the pack and stood firm. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a wall, a shield, a guardian. He looked into the jungle and whispered a silent promise. He would not let them be taken. He would become whatever he had to. He would fight. He would protect. And if this world wanted to take the cubs, it would have to take him first. The night passed slowly. Jake did not sleep, but neither did the beasts return. When the sky turned blue and the twin suns rose above the trees, the jungle woke again. Birds sang. Wind moved. But something had changed. Jake stood at the edge of the shelter and watched the forest. He knew this was not the end, only the beginning. He would have to hunt, to find food, to learn the land. But now he was ready, because last night, something inside him had changed. He had looked into the eyes of predators, and something deeper had looked back. The morning came slow and gray, with mist crawling through the jungle like silent fingers. Jake stood by the edge of the shelter with tired eyes and a tight grip on his spear. The cubs played quietly near the fire pit made from broken wiring and blackened stone. They rolled in the cloth and bit each other's tails with soft, playful growls that made Jake smile. But even as he watched them, his ears stayed open and alert for any sound that did not belong. The night had passed, but the memory of glowing eyes still burned in his mind. They had tested him. They had learned. And they would be back. Jake moved out for the shelter and walked toward the edge of the crash site. Wreckage stretched across the open field in sharp angles and twisted shapes. He stepped over broken panels and scorched wiring while his boots crunched softly on the bluegrass. He scanned the metal debris for tools. Anything that could help. He found a broken panel with a sharpened edge. He broke it free and strapped it to his arm with belt pieces from a dead crew locker. A shield of sorts. Not much, but something. Then he saw it. A trail. Large claw marks in the soft mud near the edge of the jungle. Not random. Not accidental. A single path, leading straight to the shelter. Jake knelt beside the prints and touched them. Still fresh. Still damp. They had come during the early light. Close. Too close. He followed the trail backward, each step slow and quiet. The prince circled the camp once, twice, then vanished into the thicker brush where the trees were darker and the shadows deeper. Jake stepped back. His skin crawled. They had been here, just watching, just waiting. He turned fast and ran back to the shelter. The cubs looked up as he came. Their ears twitched, and one gave a small chirp. Jake smiled, but it faded quickly. He grabbed a long pipe and stuck it upright in the ground, then tied a torn cloth to the top. A signal. If it moved, he would know. He placed small shards of metal around the shelter's edge, like a ring of mirrors, so he could see from inside if anything moved. The day passed with strange quiet. Jake searched the wreck for more gear. He found a broken panel full of circuits and a power core still glowing faint. He took it. He had plans. He would not wait to be hunted again. He would prepare. As the sun dipped low and the light turned golden, the jungle grew restless again. Birds screamed, leaves shook, and the wind carried a scent. Sharp, musky, wrong. Jake stood. The cubs felt it too. They backed into the shelter and huddled together. their eyes wide and their little bodies tight against each other. Jake held his spear and crouched low behind the rocks. The jungle fell silent. No birds, no wind, just the slow sound of something moving through the grass. A branch snapped, then another. Jake's breath slowed. He did not move. Then he saw it. The same creature from before. Dark fur, silver stripes, 6 legs, low body. It crawled toward the camp with eyes locked on the cubs. Its lips peeled back. Teeth shone. It was alone this time. A scout, or maybe just bold. Jake let it come close. Closer. He waited. Waited. Then he moved. Fast. Hard. He swung the spear with all his weight. The metal edge slammed into the beast's shoulder. It screamed and rolled away in pain. Jake jumped back. Spear up. Shield raised. The beast snarled and lunged again. Jake blocked with the panel strapped to his arm. The force knocked him backward. His back hit the rocks. But he stood. He swung again. This time the spear hit the side of the beast's neck. Not deep, but enough to make it bleed. The beast circled. Jake followed. They moved in a slow dance of growls and breath. The cubs cried inside the shelter. Jake heard them. It gave him strength. The beast leapt. Jake ducked. He drove the spear upward into its belly. It shrieked and kicked. Jake held on, pulled the spear free. Blood sprayed across the ground. The beast collapsed. It whimpered, then went still. Jake dropped to his knees. His arms burned. His chest heaved. But he was alive. He looked at the creature. It was not as big as the others. Maybe younger. Maybe reckless. But it had been real. And it had tried to kill. And Jake had won. He stood slowly and turned to the shelter. The cubs looked out with wide eyes. He knelt beside them, held out his hands. They ran to him, climbed into his lap. They licked his hands, touched his face. They knew. He had fought for them. Jake sat there in the fading light with blood on his arms and fur in his hair and 3 small lives in his lap. He looked at the trees. He knew this was not over. This was a warning, a test. They had sent one. Next time, it would be more. He carried the beast's body away from the shelter and left it near the jungle edge. A message, a line in the dirt. He wiped the blood from his hands and set to work. He reinforced the shelter. He placed sharp metal stakes in the ground around it. He wired the power core to a metal frame. A trap. If they came again, they would feel it. The stars came out, bright and strange. Jake sat by the small fire he had made with spark wires and dry roots. The cubs slept in a warm pile beside him. He watched the jungle, listened, waited, but the night passed without another sound, and the stars above seemed to watch with quiet eyes. Jake knew this place now. It was not just dangerous. It was a game of survival, of patience, of strength, and he had passed the first round. The jungle was quiet again, but the quiet did not bring peace. It felt like the air was watching, like the leaves were listening. Jake stood at the edge of the shelter with the spear in his hand and his eyes on the trees. The beast he had killed the day before still lay where he had dragged it. Flies buzzed around it, and small scavengers crept close, but none dared to touch it. Its blood had stained the grass, and the ground smelled of death. The message was clear. This ground belonged to Jake now. The cubs played softly behind him. Their fur brushed against the cloth walls, and their tiny voices sang with happy sounds. But Jake did not smile. Not yet. His mind was far away, pulled back into memories he had buried long ago, years before he had worn a uniform. He had trained in deserts and fought in frozen fields. He had been part of units sent into wild worlds, places where the maps ended and monsters began. He remembered fire. He remembered screams. He remembered the last mission, the one he never spoke about, the one that broke him. They had landed on a planet with black oceans and glass trees. Locals had called for help. Something was hunting them. Jake and his team went in. Only Jake came out. He remembered the smell of burning armor, the cries of his friend as the smoke took him, the way he had shouted for help into a dead radio, the way he had fought with bare hands when the ammo ran dry, and the way he had watched the final rescue ship rise without him. He had survived, but something inside him had not. After that mission, Jake left the service. He took jobs on quiet ships, fixed engines, avoided people, avoided himself. He told no one what happened, not even the captain. He carried the weight in silence. Until this crash, until these cubs, until now. Jake walked into the open field and looked at the wreckage. It still smoked in places. Sharp metal gleamed under the twin suns. He picked through the debris with slow hands, gathered wires, panels, pipes. He found a small emergency beacon, but its light was dead. Battery drained. He would fix it later. Maybe. Right now, he needed to build. Not to escape, but to defend. Because the jungle would come again. He knew it. The predators had tested him with one scout. Next time it would be 2, then 3, then the whole pack. Jake dragged a long sheet of broken hull toward the shelter. He planted it upright and hammered it into the ground with a stone. Then another, and another. He built a wall of metal. Sharp, tall, a barrier. Not perfect, but better than nothing. He tied wires between trees, hung shards of mirror for broken circuits. Anything to create noise if something passed. He placed the dead power core from the trap near the front gate, attached it to the sharpest metal rod he could find. A shock spear. Primitive, but deadly. The cubs watched him work. They followed his movements with curious eyes. They did not understand what he was building, but they felt his focus. They felt his fear. At sunset, Jake sat near the fire and looked at the stars again. They were strange and beautiful and cold. He thought of Earth, of blue skies, of the food stands near his old workshop, of the way people laughed in the city lights. He thought of his team, gone, buried in smoke and fire and silence. He thought of himself, how he had walked away from violence, how he had promised never to fight again, never to kill again. But now, here, that promise was broken. He looked at the cubs. They were asleep in a tight little pile, breathing soft and slow. They were small and helpless and pure. And this world wanted to tear them apart. So if that meant becoming what he once was, then so be it. He would be the monster this jungle feared. He woke before dawn and hunted the area near the cliffs. He moved low and quiet, the way he had been trained. He found a trail of fur, broken branches, a torn piece of hide. The predators had come again. He was sure of it. He marked the trees, laid small signs only he would know, symbols from his old unit, warnings. He found a flat space of land where the grass grew short and the earth was soft. He cleared it, dug shallow pits, filled them with broken glass and sharp bone, then covered them with leaves. He found a long pipe and sharpened one end. He tied it to a bent rod and set it in the dirt with tension wire. A trip trap, crude, but deadly. He spent the day like this, turning junk into weapons, turning wreckage into defense. And as he worked, something in him rose. It was not rage, not fear. It was focus, pure, cold, clear. The part of him that had once walked through fire without blinking was awake again. And this time he had a reason. At night, he sat with the cubs and told them a story. His voice low, slow, about a time on Earth when wolves ruled the wild, when humans were prey. But one day, a human stood and faced the wolves with nothing but fire and stone. And the wolves ran. He told them, that human lives in me now. And if the jungle wants you, it must go through me. The cubs chirped softly and touched his arm. They did not know the story, but they felt the truth in his voice. Jake smiled for the first time in days. Not because he felt safe, but because he felt ready. The jungle had teeth, but so did he. The wind shifted, and the jungle held its breath, as if the world itself was waiting. Jake stood on a rise near the shelter with his eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The cubs stayed low in the back of the shelter, their bodies curled tightly together, their eyes wide and ears twitching. They knew something was coming. Jake felt it too. He had not slept. He had not needed to. His body was driven by purpose. His mind was sharp with tension. He had seen the signs. He had heard the silence. The jungle was changing, and it was not hiding anymore. From the trees came a low sound like a growl mixed with a hiss. Soft, measured. Predators were near. More than one. Jake crouched behind the metal wall and pressed his hand to the earth. He felt a faint vibration. Movement. Heavy. Coordinated. They were coming in a line. A formation. These were not dumb beasts. They were hunters. He rose slowly and moved along the wall, checking the traps he had set. The sharpened pipes, the tripwire, the shock spear near the front. Everything was ready. He tightened the ropes, checked the tension. His heart beat slowly but strong. Then the first shadow moved. A shape slithered through the grass just beyond the tree line. Dark fur, broad shoulders, eyes that glowed like gold in the night. Another shape followed. Then another. Jake counted 5. No 6. All crouching low, all watching him. The lead beast was massive with scars across its face and bone spikes along its spine. The alpha. Jake had seen creatures like this in training vids, but none like this. This one moved like it knew pain, like it had survived worse. The alpha stepped forward and let out a howl. The sound was deep and echoing. A signal. The others responded with snarls and growls. They spread out. Jake stood straight and held his spear in one hand and the shield panel in the other. He did not shout this time. He did not wave. He simply waited. The first beast charged. It ran low and fast, but Jake was faster. He sidestepped and shoved his spear into the side of its neck. The metal slid deep. The beast twisted, screamed. Jake yanked the spear free and rolled behind the wall. The second beast hit the tripwire. A pipe swung down from the tree and slammed into its ribs. It crashed into the dirt, howling, and kicked wildly before limping away. Jake moved like water. Fast, silent, focused. He stabbed again and again. Each move controlled. Each strike aimed to disable. Not waste energy. Not miss. Then the alpha came. It did not charge. It walked slowly, head high, eyes locked on Jake. It stepped over the body of its packmate and growled deep. Jake held his spear low and circled. The alpha moved to block him from a shelter. It knew where the cubs were. Jake saw its eyes. He saw the hunger. He saw the calculation. This was not just a beast. It was a war leader. The alpha rushed forward. Jake blocked with a shield. The impact threw him backward. He rolled and came up fast. The alpha turned and struck again. Jake ducked. He stabbed the spear into its leg. The alpha roared. Blood poured from the wound, but it kept coming. Jake ran. He led it toward the trap, the hidden pit lined with sharp bones and steel shards. He leaped over the edge. The alpha followed, but not far enough. Its foot slammed into the pit. The shards tore its leg. It screamed. Jake spun, swung the shield like a hammer, hit its jaw. Bones cracked. The alpha staggered. Jake drove the spear into its chest, deep, until the handle bent from the pressure. The alpha howled one final time and fell back. Its body shook, then stopped. The other beasts froze. They looked at Jake, at the fallen alpha. They growled low, but none moved. Jake stood tall. His chest heaved. Blood ran down his arm. His clothes were torn, but his eyes burned with fire. He raised his voice and shouted not in fear, but in defiance. He roared with rage, with fury, with purpose. The beasts backed away. One by one, they turned and vanished into the trees. Gone, driven off by one man. Jake fell to one knee. Pain burned through his side where claws had slashed him. But he breathed slow, controlled, alive. He crawled back to the shelter. The cubs rushed to him, licking his wounds, whimpering. They curled against him and trembled. He wrapped his arms around them and closed his eyes for a moment. He had done it. He had faced the pack, alone, and won. Night passed slowly. The stars blinked above. The wind moved softly through the trees. The jungle was quiet, but not silent. It was watching. It had seen. Jake knew this was not the end. There would be more. There would always be more. But now the balance had shifted. The jungle had met the human, and the jungle had bled. The stars were fading and the sky turned deep violet as the twin suns began to rise slowly behind the horizon. Jake stood on shaky legs with blood on his arms and smoke on his clothes, and his eyes locked on the jungle wall ahead. The shelter behind him was quiet, but not asleep, as the cubs watched him from inside their cloth nest with wide, glowing eyes. Their small breaths rose and fell in silence. They had seen everything. They had seen the fight. They had seen Jake bleed. They had seen the predators run. But Jake knew something they did not. The fight was not over. Somewhere in the trees, a sound echoed. Not a howl, not a snarl, a thump, heavy, rhythmic, like the footsteps of something huge. Jake's hands tightened around the broken spear he had reforged with sharpened bone and bent steel. The blade was chipped and dark with dried blood. His shield arm trembled from bruises beneath the skin, but he did not lower it. He could feel it, the presence, the weight. The air itself grew heavier. Birds flew from the treetops. Branches cracked. A tree shifted. Then it stepped into view. The real alpha. It was unlike the others. Taller than Jake by 2 heads. Broad like a boulder wrapped in fur and muscle. Its claws dragged through the dirt, and its head was crowned with spiked bone. One of its eyes was gone. A long scar ran from brow to jaw. It had lived through battles before. Many. And now it stood before Jake. Still. Silent. They stared at each other for a long moment. Man and beast. Predator and predator. Then it moved. It charged with a roar that shook the trees and scattered the wind. Jake planted his feet and raised the shield just as the beast slammed into him like a falling star. He flew backward, crashing into the side of the shelter. Metal bent. Pain exploded in his ribs. The cubs cried out from inside. Jake stood again. He coughed blood, but did not fall. The beast came again, this time faster, wilder. Jake ducked and drove the spear upward. The tip caught flesh. The beast shrieked and spun. Its tail whipped across Jake's chest. He flew again, rolled, bounced against the dirt. He gasped for air. Everything burned, but his hands still held the weapon. The alpha turned. It sniffed the air, smelled weakness. It stalked forward. Low, slow. Jake crawled to his knees and pulled a small shard of glass from his belt. He gripped it tight. His eyes locked on the beast. It lunged. Jake rolled to the side, slammed the spear into its leg. Glass flashed in his other hand. He slashed at its neck. The beast roared. Blood sprayed. Its claw caught his arm, ripped deep. Jake screamed and stabbed again. The spear hit bone, snapped in half. He punched with the broken end. Again, again. The beast slammed him against the tree. Teeth bared, saliva dripping. Jake headbutted it. The beast reeled back. Jake grabbed the metal rod near his foot, thrust it into the beast's open mouth. It bit down. Jake kicked it with both feet. The rod drove deeper. The beast flailed. It crashed into the ground. Jake stood over it, breathing like fire, blood running down his face, his arms, his side. The beast rose slowly, its mouth bleeding, its chest heaving. But something had changed. Its eyes no longer burned. They blinked. They hesitated. Jake took a step forward. The beast stepped back. He shouted, loud, raw, not words, just power. The beast turned. It limped into the trees. Gone. Jake stood in the light of the rising sun. Alone, alive. He dropped the broken rod and fell to his knees. His chest hurt. His body ached. But his spirit, his fire, still burned. The cubs rushed to him. They licked his wounds, curled around his body. They chirped, soft and low, a sound of comfort. Jake looked at them. He smiled through the pain. He had done what no one else could. He had faced the apex, and the apex had blinked. He rose again, step by step. He looked at the jungle. It was quiet. No eyes, no growls, no threats. He had won this time, but he knew they would test him again. They always do. But now the jungle knew. The beasts knew. This was no prey, no easy meal. This was a fighter, a guardian, a predator. Jake rebuilt the wall. Tighter, stronger. He made fire traps, laid new bones, reinforced the door with metal plates. Every day he trained, lifted stone, ran the perimeter, sharpened tools, watched the trees. The cubs grew stronger, their eyes sharper, their steps quicker. They followed him now, like a shadow pack, learning, watching. Jake taught them small things. How to hide, how to listen, how to find roots and insects and water. He did not know how long they would stay, or if rescue would come. But he knew this. As long as he breathed, no beast would touch them. The scars on his body told a story. One of pain, one of loss, but also of will, of rage, of love. The jungle had made its move, and Jake had answered. The sky turned golden, and the wind moved through the tall trees like a song filled with memory and breath. Jake stood at the top of the stone ridge that overlooked the wreck and the jungle with his eyes scanning the wide horizon. His clothes were torn and patched with wire and cloth, and his skin was marked by scars that told stories without words. Behind him the shelter stood strong now, wrapped in metal and bone like a nest of survival and warning. And around him the cubs played. They were bigger now, stronger, faster, their teeth sharper and their steps more sure. They chased insects in the grass and leapt through the vines with happy chirps that filled the air with a strange peace. Jake watched them with a calm heart. He had protected them. He had fought for them. He had bled for them. And he had won. But something deeper lived in his chest now. Not fear, not rage, not even pride. It was purpose. Clear, sharp, unshakable. The jungle had tested him. Over and over. Night after night. Claw after claw. It had tried to break him, but had failed, because Jake had remembered who he was. Not a soldier, not a killer, not a machine, but something older, something wilder, a protector. He walked down the slope slowly and reached the edge of the field where the last predator had fallen. The grass still carried the black stain of blood, and the air still held the scent of battle. But nothing came near that spot now. The jungle remembered. The beasts remembered, and they did not return. He stepped over broken branches and metal debris as he moved toward the final piece of the wreckage. A bent signal dish. Its frame cracked, its core dead, but Jake had been working on it. Each night, little by little, with wire, with circuits, with patience. And now it blinked. Just once. But enough. He crouched beside it and adjusted the panel with steady hands. His fingers still bore the cuts of work and the burns of heat, but they did not shake. The dish turned, clicked, locked. The light blinked again. Then a low hum filled the air. He smiled. Behind him the cubs came running. One leapt onto his back while another bit gently at his arm. The third rubbed its head against his chest. Jake laughed for the first time in weeks. A real sound, soft and alive. He stood slowly and looked up at the sky. Clear now, wide. The stars above seemed closer, brighter, like they were watching, waiting. A light appeared in the far sky, small at first, then brighter, closer. Jake narrowed his eyes and felt his heart slow. He reached for the flare in his pack and held it high, pulled the cap, lit the fire. Red smoke climbed into the air like a cry. The ship came down slowly, a rescue craft, old but strong. It hovered above the trees and lowered legs into the dirt. Dust flew, leaves shook. The cubs huddled close, eyes wide. The hatch opened. A figure stepped out, helmeted, armed, human. Jake raised a hand, and the figure froze. Looked at him, looked at the cubs, lowered the weapon. More figures came. Medical, engineering. One pointed to the wreck. One ran to the signal dish. One just stared at Jake in silence. They spoke, but Jake did not hear the words. His ears were full of jungle, of wind, a breath, of blood. They moved closer. The medic scanned him, raised a brow, whispered something into a small mic. The engineer looked at the cubs, confused, curious, worried. Jake stepped forward and stood between the cubs and the team. He raised a hand. They are mine now, he said. They come with me. No one argued. Not after seeing his face. Not after seeing the ground. The traps. The scars. The commander came last. An old man with cold eyes and a steel jaw. He looked Jake up and down and nodded once. You fought them, he said. Jake nodded. They came. I stayed. I won. The commander looked at the jungle and back at Jake. No one ever wins out here, he said. Jake smiled. Then I must not be no one. They stayed for 3 days. Gathered the bodies. Mapped the terrain. Recorded the story. Jake watched. Helped. Spoke little. On the 4th morning, they offered him a seat on the ship. Back to the colonies. Back to the stations. Back to the noise. The lights. The cold walls of metal cities. Jake looked at the cubs. They looked back. He looked at the trees. At the sky. At the shelter. He looked at his hands. His feet. The ground. He said nothing. Just turned and walked back to the shelter. The cubs followed. The commander watched for a while. Then nodded. left a beacon, left supplies, left a message. And then the ship rose. Wings wide, engines low, it vanished into the clouds. Jake sat by the fire that night, with the cubs asleep at his side. The wind moved like a story around him, and the jungle was quiet, not in fear, not in anger, but in respect. They had seen what he was. Not prey, not meat, but one of them. A hunter, a warrior, a protector. And across the stars, the story spread of a man, a mechanic, a broken soldier, who became legend, who stood in front of helpless creatures and snarled at death, and made death run.